Hi, I'm Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. This is a reminder that we're going on tour next summer. Yes, that's right, we're going on tour. The Living Undeterred US Tour 2022. We're leaving on May 9th next summer. We're going to every state and we're raising $1 million. That's the plan to change the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. We need your help, though. I cannot do this alone. I know there's a lot of people out there interested in this project of ours. You can go to our website, www.livingundeterred.com. We need volunteers. We need state partnerships. We need sponsors. We need as many people as we can to get out there and help those people that need help to change the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. Again, go to livingundeterred.com and click on the Living Undeterred icon, and all the information is there. Again, thank you very much for the support, and as always, keep living undeterred. Hello, this is Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. Excited about today's show. This is the last taping in my season. Starting off season 2, I'm going to be Yes, I'm still going to have Eddie from Iron Maiden involved somehow, but banner that I have right now. Today's guest is exciting, and I'm sure my story is going to be maybe initially a little surprised on our topic, but as I plow through this learning experience that I've been an opportunity through losing my son and my wife. I also don't want to be naive and to stigmatize certain industries when it really comes down to choices. That's what this is all. Rob and I are going to talk at length about choices. And I met Rob on. He's got a cult following. He runs the Drunken Grape podcast, which I've seen some episodes on his show, and Rob knows my story. I know his story, and I still have a dog named Camus, Rob, so I am a wine snob, even though I don't drink alcohol. I am what I would consider a wine snob, so some shape or fashion I can learn a little bit more about wine, but I don't drink. I drink not. We're going to navigate a little bit into that industry as well, because that is an exploding, and I think for a lot of people, I know you're in the virtual tasting world, and I at it at link too. So with that, from Ottawa is my new good friend, Rob Statham.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jeff. This is great to be here. It's a real honor. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited. And like I said, I stumbled into you on LinkedIn, and I'm not sure what the context was of the conversation I invaded when you were having a dialogue with somebody, but I said, you know what, the great thing about this journey I'm on, Rob, is that everybody has a story. And you and I had a pre-interview conversation. We hit it off great. I think we talked for an hour.
Oh yeah.
You had a lot of death presented to you, and we talked immediately about your dad, about your twin sister. Maybe a little bit you could start off on that aspect of your passion and kind of your why in what you do, and maybe we start with the law and how that's been such an impact to you.
Well, I mean, that's there's a lot of aspects to that. It's first of all, my dad was a big fan. He was the one that my late father was the one that convinced me to get into beer and wine. I grew up with him making wine and beer at home. He was a big home brewer and winemaker, and he had books on the subject. He was a huge fan of history. He was a very learned man. He was very smart, and I was at his house like 11 years ago, and I was in the world of technology at the time. I was in my late 30s. I had a business with an unscrupulous partner who actually happened to have a drinking problem as well. And he had ripped off a pile of people, including myself and the consultants. Thank God they all knew I was the owner. That was the good one. I was part of the fall that they had experienced. So I left that on good terms with everybody else, except him. So I was determined to do something else. And I was looking at project management because I was immersed in that world, right? You sell a project. The next thing you know, you're bidding on a contract, and you're setting up the team to go in there. Then you have to actually manage the client's expectations, and you have to see how all these things evolve. And then from the people's work, you would have recommendations for further things to address down the road, which is all part of the project management book of knowledge, or the project management cycle itself through Pinbox. So I was looking to do my PMP. And I went over to my dad's place, and, he was a massive wine and beer and spirits fan. And he looked at me and he said, "Why do you want to get into that? That's going to be downtrodden and beaten, and there's not going to be a whole lot of money in that. That's going to be a diminishing return over time. Why don't you get into the wine and beer world? That's what I would do." And I thought about it because I had a part-time job bartending. So I thought about it. I'm like, well, that could be a lot of fun because mixology is a ton of fun. So I started to explore it with somebody I worked with part-time who happened to be a wine rep, and they gave me recommendations into the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. So from there, I took courses with them. They're by far the biggest global powerhouse in wine education in the world, and the strongest. So they're out of London, England, and I tied myself into that and eventually got my advanced certificate. And then lo and behold, I went out and started working on the side with this company called Groovy Grapes. And it sort of all fell together, and it was from his inspiration that I drove into that field. And it's funny, it's probably the first time the second time I seriously listened to him on a career advice. And it's funny how both times they worked out. But it's, so it's, from there the journey started. So with his passing, it was obviously a big loss. I mean, but he was older. He was 74. He was fighting leukemia for 2.5 years, and he was pretty tough and held out for quite a long time. And he succumbed. And, it started my journey as into the why continue to do this, because the road of entrepreneurship, especially here in Canada on high tax land, it's not for everybody. In fact, very few people can really stomach it over time. There's always pressure. Yes, it's self-induced pressure. The beauty is you control all your time and the elements of time that go in that. But a lot of people just can't. They're conditioned to not be able to live without that paycheck. So they're conditioned that they can't live without that paycheck. Let me rephrase that. But, he gave me that driving inspiration, right? And he was a fan. He started watching my TV segments. I got onto TV. That's a whole different story. But I had a whole background in entertainment from the cruise line industry and being on stage, and tons of public speaking from being an assistant cruise director and an auctioneer of sports memorabilia and fine art. So, yeah, it was pretty cool. So, yeah. So you're not the first person that has thrown that out at me, but it's funny. There's a cruise director named Richard Joseph that's a legend in that industry. He was the first one to dub me that back like 20 years ago when I was his assistant on a ship for Renaissance Cruises. But they inspired me. My dad believed I could do it, and I said, well, I'm given this TV spot. Nobody else can do it. I haven't been on set in 9 years. He goes, well, just go for it. And I did. And I felt rusty, but I hit a home run with the ownership of that company. And I took that TV spot. And there's a lot of things I can attribute back to family and support and the fuel that they gave me. And, the losses of them continue to fuel me. So warping ahead, my twin sister, got hit with cancer about 6 months after my dad passed. And she beat it initially. So she was clean for about 1.5 years after she went through, I would like to say, maybe about 1 year's worth of treatments, maybe a little less than that. But she had beat it for a while, and she had fought stage 3 breast cancer. It was into her lymphatic system. And there's a history of breast cancer in my family. All the women had beat it, unfortunately, except for her. She had other health problems. She couldn't lift her arms over her head from the age of puberty on. It's funny because she was athletic prior to that, and I wasn't. When she diminished, I gained greatly in athleticism and turned into an athlete. I can't explain these things, but it's weird. But it's exactly what happened. And I think because her lymphatic system is already compromised, because you can't lift your arms over your head, you can't drain your lymph nodes around your neck as effectively as somebody who's healthy and strong, she ultimately succumbed to this, and it was really sad, and it went into stage 4 cancer when it came back into her liver, and that's what killed her. I mean, she was gone in about 6 weeks. She was complaining about back pains and then had spasms. But she also followed my journey, and she'd show up on the TV set, even when she was going through chemo the first time around and beating it initially and just staving it off. She would show up, and that gave me inspiration. And my mother It was the other one who succumbed, and it was from Lewy body dementia back in April, I think of 29th or 20th of 2020. Trying to remember, it's the 29th, I believe, is when she passed. So my mother was always a fan of what I did and always supported me pretty strongly too. And it's a matter of this all, I can tell you that it was very hard 15 months after I lost my sister, and then you lose your mother, it starts to rattle you again. And it's the why of why I drive to do my journey now. I love freedom. I hate bosses. I, I hate being told what to do, and somebody's always stepping on top of you with their own agenda. And this is a hard road. So that really fuels me to step forward, and to step up and step out and really continue to grow this. And really, I realized that it's like eating an elephant. The whole thing looks massive. Like I told you, I've got a super busy day today. But really, when I slowed it down, I'm now looking back, and I started a little late at about 7:30 in the morning. And then I realized, wow, I've actually gotten a lot done today, and my head's right around my huge presentation tomorrow, which is going to be a blast for a repeat client for a virtual beer tasting holiday and Christmas party.
Well, I was impressed when we were talking about the idea of seizing the moment. I talked to you about
Carpe diem.
My only tattoo I have is on my arm. It's living in the moment symbol, and I think that's an important part of, I would say, grief, and I would say part of grief and trauma therapy, maybe of you really need to live for today. And I think my mom passed away a month ago as well, and so I think it's easy for us to go back, have those memories with these loved ones, but get kind of fixed on the ones that make us sad. So it's the good memories, but it's the ones that make us sad. And so it's like, how do you turn that around? I this question: how do you take those 3 deaths that you've had and look back on them and not get too fixated on the negative and the sad parts of it? I mean, what things do you do for your coping mechanisms?
Well, I mean, I'm fortunate. I've got a lot of great friends. I've got really good family members, the existing family. The family was always strong, so that pulled around me. And I really woke up to the fact that your time here is very finite. It's rented. So, people harp about the past, and we have always seen somebody like this right up to the day they pass. They're always bitter about the past. And, unfortunately, my father suffered a bit from this, and it was a lesson learned that we can't change our past transgressions or some of the stupid mistakes we've made, because we've all done it. But what we can do is control every millisecond of right now. And you can seize right now, because you can't predict the future. I mean, you could go outside tomorrow and a meteor hits that part of the world you're walking around and it's over. But what you can do is control the moment of the present. And I think there's a massive amount of gifts by being able to do that. And that also does help cope, because if you seize the moment, you're like, okay, I can unburden myself of the past and unburden myself of worrying about the future. Sure, we make future plans, but focus on executing what needs to be done in the present towards that future. And I find that brings a lot of solace and comfort, to be quite honest with you. It's for me, it's a clarity of thought, and it's a passion and a purpose all tied together with it. And, I love that you bring that up with the whole concept of living undeterred, because carpe diem is that old Latin term of seize the day. And they were really onto something sharp in the high Renaissance period coming out of Florence, the 14th, 15th century, where that really sparked. So for me, that really resonates. And I think 99% of the world, it's like what Warren Buffett says about why 98% of people fail. It's a little harsher coming out of his mouth. But, I think part of that ties into the fact that 98% of this world fails to seize the moment. They fail to seize the present. They're constantly using their present to bicker about the past or struggle towards a future which is uncertain.
Yeah, that's a good way to say that. The great poet Horace said, "Non sum qualis eram," I am not what. And if you think of that, really, literally, none of us are what we used to be. I'm not
Ever.
this. Yeah, I mean, almost daily, almost hour by hour, we're shedding skin cells. There's an evolution going on inside of our bodies that if we don't learn to embrace that and not fight it, we get stuck in this self-created purgatory of torture and pain. And I've learned through my journey, my book, all the things I've done, which I'm sure you would agree, is it's a process, it's an evolution. I think the minute we stop learning is when we start dying. And so when I reached out to you,
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
this guy do, and I said, well, he runs the Drunken Grape, and they're like, well, you don't drink, Jeff. So what are you guys going to talk about? Well, I think that there's so much that you do just focused on just the alcoholic consumption. I know your core
Well, of
business
course
is
not.
virtual
No.
wine. Yeah, your core business is virtual wine tasting. So I have to
And
ask this
beer.
question.
Yeah, I had to throw
What's
that
that?
in there. Sorry, and beer as well. I'm actually very big into beer as well.
Yeah, and
So
I'm
kind of
gonna,
like a
and like I said,
two-pronged monster on that account.
I'm gonna hopefully get you onto some good NAs that I have a refrigerator full of wheats and IPAs, and I did a whole podcast on my top 15 NAs because there's a lot of people that still drink alcohol, but maybe half the time they mow their yard with an NA. They don't want to have a beer when they're mowing their yard. Or they
Oh
fish
yeah.
with an NA.
Yeah.
But then they come home and crack open that nice glass of Opus One or something like that. Um, uh, the timing of your business, was this because of COVID, or were you doing this aggressively pre-COVID? Because it seems like virtual wine tasting has to be a perfect niche right now with the inability for people to have conferences and big parties.
Yeah, and especially now with the panic over Omicron, which, my personal side of it is that it's a bit hyped up and trumped up if you're already vaccinated and you've been wise. I would be worried if I wasn't vaccinated, but that's a totally different topic, and we're not here to be political on that stuff. But because of it, just to see the psyche of it, yeah, there's a reduction even here in Canada with live events now. So again, the virtual concept is sparking up. Now, this was a brainchild and a vision of mine to be able to work anywhere I could, wanted to work, live anywhere I wanted to live while making money years ago. But I was very much into the live stream of things. And it was hard. Like, this city was hard to break into. Ottawa's a conservative city. It's government, so it's a lot of bureaucracy here, and then there's a lot of manipulation by people putting their hands into pots to influence peddle to get contracts here. It's just the way this city works. I don't think any capital city would really be a whole lot different in the world, really, in any democracy. But what happened was I had some slated events. They died. I was working on videography for wineries and breweries. That initially died because nobody could go anywhere, especially that first 5 months of the pandemic when it hit from really March 13th is when that hard order of a wall crapped down in 2020, and that's when the shutdown started. So I, like everybody else, was just sort of looking back going, okay, what are we going to do? So I started talking a lot about local wine picks and beer picks because I know quite a bit of both. And I wanted to support the local economy because it was so important, because these are some of my friends. I mean, some of my friends lost 95% of their business and had to retool and go online. So the fall came around. Yeah, and the fall came around and I was just like, man, this thing is not slowing down. I'm going to hit the switch on virtual. So I only started this about 14, 15 months ago. And after my first short video, it would be likely I got called out and hired 2 weeks later for a company called Eldridge Industries to host a beer tasting, and it went really well. And it was rustic because I was doing it not in a setup like this where things are properly set and I have like a cocktail round with a bit of a setup behind me, a wine and beer fridge to the right of me, and in with a podcast studio mic and that. It was rustic, but it went off, and I was like, wait a second, I'm onto something here. So that last year, it really did lift off. I mean, there was about 12 or 15 contracts that came in, and I've been busy into the spring, the summer, and the fall. This winter was a slowdown with a little bit of an odd uptick towards the end. But the holiday season in general, everyone has just gone to hold mode, but now it's starting to boom again because now there's reservations for the next year because, fear is so easy to spread in the population. Politicians love playing that game. So I don't think we're out of this for a while in some capacity, unfortunately, until the populace puts their foot down on it, like the sane populace. But it gives a window of good opportunity. And then the other end of it is it's never going to go away now because the massive savings in corporate travel and corporate or commercial real estate is another animal that's going to be history. I expect a massive global commercial real estate crisis to appear at some point because nobody's going back to these offices. Nobody wants to. And even now, in mandates, a company's trying to bring people back, or governments here in Ottawa, people just don't want to go back. Their unions are fighting it and saying, no, you only let the people go back a day or two a week, not 5. And now with Omicron popping its ugly head up, it's going to cause that to continue, more of a stay-at-home work order, as part of a way to combat it.
Step me through what is a virtual wine tasting. How does it? At some point,
Sure.
I really want to get into the space because
because that's a big growing emerging.
No, it is, and if somebody like that as an opportunity, not a threat, then you're an entrepreneur, and everything's an opportunity, right?
And the irony is, I actually have that in my next event tomorrow. Is that there's, I believe, 3 people out of 15 or 16 that are not drinkers.
Yeah,
So
but they like to have
a series of non-alcoholic. Yeah, so I mean, the talk won't center around them, but they're going to be included in the talk because really the history of non-alcoholic has been around a long, long time. You got to remember, water was totally unsafe to drink for centuries. The last time from the fall of the Roman Empire with aqueducts, which actually filtered out and did a great job of sustainable, clean water being trafficked through to the population. Well, that crumbled, right? And the empire fell. So we went into the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages. You could not drink water. But what they did drink, and this has happened throughout large pockets of history, even in Roman times, if you weren't in a Roman society, chances are you were probably Northern Europe or Northwestern Europe. It was a heavy brewing culture. And again, their water was largely unsafe because they didn't have the technological or scientific advancements the Romans had. So they drank a very low alcohol beer. It was probably around 0.5%, which is the standard for non-alcoholic today. It's called small beer. And small beer really saved the lives of humanity, if you think about it, because it gave you a source of nutrition and it hydrated you. So it's, that whole segment is booming. So to get into the virtual tasting itself, it's much like a live one. The only tricky part's the logistics. If they're in Ontario, I'll arrange for the brewery or the winery to have things shipped to them as the clients. Locally, I'll have it delivered.
You actually provide the product then?
Well, I'll source it for them. And often, in a lot of cases, what happens if they're outside of this province, I'll source it for them and they have to go get it themselves. So it's sort of it strips my hands of having to deal with liquor licenses and other headaches. So it keeps it legal and viable too. If it's within Ontario, I have the brewery sent it. So, I mean, they're fully licensed to deliver anyway. So that's just a nice tie-in. And it's just sort of a pass-through. Like, it's client pays you what it costs and you just transfer it to the brewery saying, well, here it goes. Or you just get the client to call the brewery up and say they're ready for your credit card number. Here's the details. I have everything set in place. The pallet's waiting for you, So that's more the way I typically do, and it's really easy to do. So what happens is I send out something like an engagement guide. I call it the engagement guide, but it's an outline of just what's going to be discussed and what to expect. Have some water beside you, have glassware, open face stemless glassware, whether it's a tulip glass or an open wine glass or a tumbler. They're great for tastings. And you got to think about it. The rest of this now is exactly the way a live tasting would happen. So, I mean, you'd have this glassware laid in front of you, except it's laid in front of them, and we're now talking over a Zoom call. So basically, you cover a lot of sensory and you package in the history and the history and some of the fun facts of the history of wine or beer and the wineries and breweries being presented. So you engage them, and this conversation just spirals into a massive engagement party. People start talking about what they're experiencing in a glass, what they enjoy. They start talking about what they think it would pair with after you've given some suggestions. And the beauty of it is, because it's subjective, there's no right or wrong answer. So you can really engage your audience so well. And the brilliant part of this is, think of, you've got a finance team. Part of it works in LA. Part of it's in New York City. Some of it's in Chicago. Well, it's easy to do a virtual event because you got a 3-hour window between all those points, between the two furthest points. So it's easy to set it up and say, hey, it's happy hour at 4 o'clock in LA because it's 7 p.m. in New York. It's still early enough to get off and kick off an event. And you put them on this journey for an hour, and then you open up to a Q&A. This is just my standard format. And you get them to really engage and open up. And what happens is that party continues online after you're gone. And it's just a great way to do it. And for companies, you have flattened the curve. This is like when email came in and flattened the corporate office and got rid of the telegram and the person who had to type everything and the person who had to carry the letter out the door and the mailroom. Like, it literally eliminated the mailroom. Well, this is almost going to eliminate a lot of your typical corporate small to mid-size events, events up to 100 people. They're not going to go back to the hotels and the lobbies anymore. That's never coming back. They're not going to fly in 6 people from different points out of that 50, for instance, and that's a common number. You have 10% of your people that they have to truck in for various reasons. And, they do a makeshift training session for a day or two to justify the $5,000 they just spent to fly you and put you up somewhere and feed you and everything else. Yeah, you can just see where this is going. So you collapse costs dramatically. And these have, the best businesses solve problems, and this solves a ton of problems for planning events and keeping people engaged. You wipe out costs. You wipe out the time too. So think about the time it takes for your office manager or your inside event management team to contact that hotel or that conference center to deal with their sales team, which is often clumsy because I've worked in a few hotels. I mean, some people are great, but a lot of it's mediocrity, and there's the politics of a hotel or a convention center to go through. I mean, some of them like the Shaw Center here run really well on that front, but a lot of them don't. So what happens is you also have a fairly high turnover in staff in hospitality because a lot of the positions don't pay well. They haven't learned to fix a chronic problem. So you're alleviating that, and it takes months to plan some of these things where you can have a turnaround time in, 2 weeks on a virtual event. It can be up, happening, and moving within 2 weeks.
I think it's great because if you look at the mental health, the substance abuse, the depression, the anxiety, suicidal ideation, a lot of it's due because of people's inability to connect, that we're sitting here in our house, it's difficult to get together. And I think the virtual thing is something that's going to stay. And I would be, selfishly, Rob, virtual non-alcoholic party. I tell you why I say that.
Yeah, well, that's coming emerging. That's emerging, sure.
I had like 8 friends over here for we had a football game, and I had some friends over. Well, they know I don't drink, and they bring their own beer and stuff. I set out like 10 different non-alcoholic beers, and I had people sample them. I had people drink them, and you would be shocked how many people then went home and then ordered a 6-pack off the same website. And it's not that I'm not trying to tell people what to do. Right, I'm not preaching to people. I'm not anti alcohol and drugs. I'm anti bad choices. I think I told you that. I'm anti poor choices. And even myself, as someone who doesn't drink, I don't feel threatened by alcohol. It's not the boogeyman out there coming to get me. And so I have a little bit of a naive approach as and I don't have this day-to-day struggle or battle with me. And a lot of my friends are that way too. Now, have massive drinking problems, and they need to figure out their own ways to alleviate that. But if you'd even dial this down a little bit tighter and to say we're alcoholic, because I just had an order of non-alcoholic whiskeys, brandies, tequila, and gin and rum show up last week, and I tell you, they're not that bad.
Well, they'll get a lot better too. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
No, you're right. So, I mean, the global market of alcohol is massive. It's probably close to $1 trillion market globally. Beer is 72 billion. Wine's 72 billion. Beer's at least a 10x factor. I believe beer is about a 10x factor to that. So you're looking at near $750 billion. And then we haven't even gotten into the spirits market yet, or the ready-to-drink market, or cocktails in a can, and all sorts of things. And that's sales. To put it in perspective, there's more revenue in beer sales, I believe, worldwide per year, while far more than all the big tech companies combined in all the product they move. put that is so if you yeah, if you take a look at probably the dollar value of all the breweries and wineries in the world, it would eclipse almost every piece of business. It's insane. So for me to say that wine has encountered its first dip in a very long time in that global picture of revenue. It's because people are moving. Somewhat. I mean, beer has definitely grown, especially on the craft side. But what's happening is there is now a push, and we're starting to see high single digit to double digit growth in the non alcoholic beverage space. And it's interesting because it used to be poor quality stuff. What they would do with beer to de alcoholize it is they would heat it. Now, there's a problem when you use heat. Guess what happens? You start to cook a lot of the good things that are in that too. So the beer almost could end up lifeless and flavorless. And, this was propagated during the Prohibition era. And what they used to do is take a needle, inject booze into the cask of non-alcoholic beer to make it alcoholic because they hated the taste of it. And the progress since has been gigantic. So what they do is they use vacuum pumps. So I think the vacuum separates the alcohol, which is less dense than the water component of it. And you remove most of the alcohol that way without destabilizing the rest of the structure by cooking it. Because if you cook it, you're changing the molecular structure of it, right? I don't know. That's about all the science I know of it. But what's happening is even Weihenstephan, the oldest active brewery in the world from 1040 AD, has never been uninterrupted since 1040 AD. It's survived four wars. I think the brewery is partially burned down 3 or 4 times. There's all sorts of things that have gone on there. Yeah, and that's the originator of, I believe, the Hefeweizen or Weiss beer. I mean, that really comes from them. So, and there's a technical institute. I think the Siebel Institute of Technology is located not too far from them, and that's a powerhouse in brewing in the world. Now, I may be a little off there, but I do know it may be another institute. But at any rate, they have a great non-alcoholic beer that mimics that Hefeweizen style. And, I'm excited to try a platform of a couple. There's a sour beer I have in the house, a blonde, a IPA, and a stout. And I'm going to sit down and try these tonight as I'm writing up my tasting notes for the rest of the things this afternoon. The non-alcoholic space is just going to grow by default anyway, because when you have an alcoholic event, it's probably a wise question now to ask, who's the non-drinkers in the crowd that want to be included in this? Otherwise, they're just going to sit out of it or twiddle their thumbs, and they're always going to be resistant to joining your alcohol party. I mean, the facts are at least a quarter of the population in the Western world is going to continue to drink. That will not be interrupted whatsoever. But what is happening is that people are waking up to wiser choices or drinking more but less. That's always been my theme. Drink far better. It's better. You're better off to drink far better quality alcohol and probably a lot less of it than the cheap stuff.
And I'll tell you what, Rob, it's the same thing with non-alcoholic beer. I'd rather drink a heavier, fuller non-alcoholic beer than drink 20 Busch NAs.
Yeah.
So that concept
Yeah.
isn't just for alcoholic beverages. It's also for non-alcoholic. But the funny thing is here I am talking to you about this as a non-drinker, and I also have people on talk about drugs, and I've never done drugs, but I'm an advocate for harm reduction. So, that's a whole nother bridge over to addiction and substance abuse when you have harm reduction, because I think the fact that we stigmatize addicts and alcoholics as drunks and winos and derelicts and losers of society, and we incarcerate them. And what we should be doing is giving them another day to live. We should be focusing on the worst possible death. And if my son would have had a chance to test his heroin that day, October 4th, 2016, if he could have had a chance to, he would have lived the day. He would have lived the day, Rob. And what I tell people is this: every single day, there is somebody on this planet that this is the last day they use. Every single day. Yep. And the day before, had they died, they never would have had that opportunity. So I am a huge advocate. And I don't know as much about harm reduction as some of the experts and the clinical people, but the reality is that shouldn't we as a society be more interested in saving lives than trying to prevent people from doing drugs
Yes,
or prevent them from
absolutely.
drinking? Shouldn't we be
Absolutely.
saving lives and rehab and recovery and all this other stuff, but just give them another day to live?
Absolutely. And I think even getting into my space with alcohol, it's like one thing I tell people is you should not be drinking every day. I don't care what they say. Oh, that glass or two of red wine a day. Hey, it's like, no, because it's beyond that. Sure, if you could hold it to a couple glasses of wine in a day, you'll be fine. But how many people do that? Because they become a creature of habit. They start reaching for more. So by breaking it up and saying, I'm going to have at least a couple dry days a week, and this is where the non-alcoholic beverages can definitely find a segue into your life. If you want to reach for that beer still, well, reach for that non-alcoholic stout instead of the regular imperial stout that's got 8% or 10% alcohol in it, as an example. And it creates a habit. So by controlling it or doing a lot less of it, I think we would have a lot better appreciation for it. Most people would. And there would be a lot less problems, societally speaking, with it. I mean, this is the whole reason prohibition came about in the first place. It was because women's religious groups started lobbying governments in the 1850s because at one point here in Canada, in Ontario, which was called Upper Canada at the time, there was a tavern for every 478 residents. Think about that for a minute. And a lot of it was the military, and the British had a habit of paying the military, and part of their pay was in rations of daily beer. This was common. So that was common.
You are quite the historian on this topic.
Yeah, so it's you have to know this stuff to dig deep to understand the mechanics of how it works. And being a live presenter, I have to know this because questions come at different angles, or doing various TV spots over the years. It's like writing a report every week when you're going on the set. So but it just shows you why. And if we could educate people a bit better on wiser choices, saying, hey, you don't have to drink every day. On that off day, enjoy that non-alcoholic beer. Have 5 of them. Go to the gym, hit the bike, work out, go play a sport. Do stuff that's outside of just lounging around and having a drink, because that's a huge part of our culture, and that's not going to change easily over time. But what you can do is reduce the impact of it. And I think that's the first step that's necessary.
Some of the issues and challenges are that there's certain people that just can't drink. They turn into a monster. And those people know themselves. You can look in the mirror and you can tell yourself, I can drink or I can't drink. Now, whether or not you can implement that and end up not drinking, that's a whole different disease, choice, model, all that stuff. Reality is, I look in the mirror and give you a good example. And this is why the Living Undeterred project is so important to me, because it's a research project. It's not a sermon. Teaching people ways to get sober. I'm trying to teach people to make better choices, but I write in my book about a period of time in my life when I was a compulsive gambler. And it got to be tough. I'm a financial advisor and a compulsive gambler. That doesn't look too good on your.
Yeah.
And so I'm in my late 20s, early 30s, where I had a major issue with it. But I wasn't hurting anybody. I wasn't married, or I was married at that time. If I lost money, I didn't. I wasn't really hurting anybody. I was. Well, I quit. I just quit cold turkey. 20 years. And I knew, Rob, and I knew that if I went to a casino, especially when I was drinking, table, 2 things were going to happen. Either I was going to win all the money in the casino, or I was going to go broke. It happened more often than not.
Going broke.
Yeah, every time. There was never enough money to win. I didn't have an objective. Right, so I quit. So where I'm going with this story, when I quit drinking, then I thought to myself, well, now I wonder if I can gamble for fun. I wonder if I could go to casinos and fun. I've been gambling now for about a year, and I'm having a blast. I went with a good friend. I haven't been out in Las Vegas in like 15 years. We just got back last weekend. I never sat at the card table one time. All I did sits in a sports book. I drank Coors Edge, which is their NA. Had a great time. Went to see a show. Went shopping. Came back, and I thought, why was I so afraid to go there? Well, a lot of it was because once I started drinking, then I drank too much. I overdrank, and then I just decided I made poor choices. But I think part of the Living Undeterred project, Rob, is to get people to challenge themselves continuously and keep learning. I don't anticipate going back to drinking, but I'm also not going to say I never will. You know, as you said, I'm seizing the moment. At this time right now, I'm not drinking. Not tomorrow when I get there. You know, I got to live today first, right?
Yeah, yeah, you gotta get past the hurdles of the day. You know, it's funny when people say, "Oh yeah, I'll just get to that tomorrow." It's like, well, you know, just get through the hurdle of today. Just do it now if you can. Just tackle it.
Where's the next evolution of your virtual wine tasting business, and where do you see the next entry points into markets that would be exciting for you going forwards?
Well, it's hard to say. I know India is an emerging market. You know, certain countries are actually becoming more acceptant to certain alcoholic beverages than they were before. It's becoming more widespread. Um, I think really on a scalable side, my plan is to grow this into some type of juggernaut. And I'm just trying to see how that's going to work and how that's going to scale. And I'm always consulting with friends who've built 8-digit businesses and things like that to learn from them. But there's definitely a window of opportunity to do so. And I think that opportunity is going to be here for quite some time. So I do see the non-alcoholic space growing. It's definitely something that's going to expand into the repertoire. It's something in a near-term thing that you mentioned that is definitely real. And, you know, from last year to this year, this group, last year, there was no non-alcoholic beverages shipped off. And this time around, there was. So it starts to give you an insight into what's starting to happen. And young people are sort of extremes. It's, you know, the younger generation, I observe them still bartending very part-time at a hotel. They either come up and ask you for a non-alcoholic drink or they're asking for the bucket of beer or the pitcher. So it's kind of like more my end. When I was in university, I wanted the pitcher. But there's also socially... Yeah, and I think socially, because the world's more integrated now and religiosity is more integrated, what is happening is there's much more of a tolerance towards people who will go to a bar and ask for a non-alcoholic drink. Like, listen, if somebody comes to the bar and they say, "Hey, Rob, can you make me a Caesar, but I want it non-alcoholic?" I'm like, yeah, absolutely. It's going to be just about as good as the alcoholic one. The only difference is you'll walk away after 5 of those. The other, you might have to go to the bathroom, but the other guy's going to be staggering. You know, and your wallet's going to also probably be about 70% heavier still as a result of not spending that money. But so those markets are definitely growing, and we can see that, as you mentioned, with the spirits, that they're coming along and they're okay. I know beer has definitely made leaps and bounds. Some of it is crap, like, you know, Budweiser's Prohibition tasted like a cardboard box. I've tried that stuff, but there are craft producers coming out producing award-winning products now.
Dude, you would not believe
So, I mean, it's just
you would not
expanding.
believe the NA beers I have in my fridge. I have 5 NAs from around.
Oh no,
around the
I'm now
world.
seeing it.
And
Yeah.
I did a podcast, my top 15 NAs, and I tell you what, if it wasn't for the alcohol, I don't think people could tell the difference. I don't think you can tell the difference. The taste, on your palate, the foam that comes up, the aroma, the caramel, the malts, it's really exciting, especially, and I'm a cigar smoker, so I got the perfect way to fix this problem for someone who doesn't want to drink.
I like the
Get a
odd
nice
cigar. It's great.
get a nice Cohiba on a nice summer day, sit on your porch, crack open one of these IPAs I have, or a nice ale, a wheat, and smoke that cigar and sip your NA. And, you know, I get the good buzz, you know, but I don't get the hangover and all that stuff. And again, I think I'm just trying to find and deal with what I'm dealing with in my life, but I don't want to just go get drunk every night, you know? And that was my way I handled it for so many years.
Yeah, and that's quite smart of you to deal with it that way. I think that's quite clever. And it's, you know, alcohol does add a certain sharpness that can't be replaced. I mean, that part, being a sommelier and a beer sommelier, I'm definitely gonna lay out there. But what is happening is, you know, I got to test more of these products, but as I dive in and research it more, and it really started to happen this week as a result of, you know, they booked the event 8-9 days ago, and my habit is never to even lift a finger until the event's paid, because then the old adage is, what event did I book, right? It's one of those things you got to pay for in advance. It's like an all-inclusive trip. You know, you can't pay for that after you went on vacation, but it's, It's a fascinating field because I always knew of de-alcoholized beer existing. It's existed since the beginning of beer. I mean, people fed families on very low alcoholic beer. The monks lived off low alcoholic beer. It was the more alcoholic beer that was shipped off to the lords or the cardinals and the pope. They would or they would sell it to the travelers passing through because it would garnish the most money. But they would often look after the poor population with these very low alcoholic brews. So this has been around a long, long time. And breweries have always had the capacity, because I'm going to use them as a focal point, because they're probably sitting in the best seat of the house as far as moving this movement forward. It's because you think about it, the unit cost of beer is a lot less. Their impact and reach is far greater. Every corner of this earth drinks beer. So the option to create some non-alcoholic beer and some brilliant quality alcoholic beer is definitely all over the roadmap there. It exists. I would be interested to see what they do with wine. That one might be tricky. I can't see Camus being de-alcoholized.
No, it just that's a great question. I am anticipating alcoholic wines, but I'm kind of like, I just can't see that. I sit around, drink grape juice in a glass. I'd rather just go to my NA beer. But I was going to ask you, you've probably, maybe you haven't, visited some pretty neat brewery time, based on your knowledge level and your interest in the brewery space. Is there any particular brewery that comes to mind that you visited that's kind of like the best one you've ever? When I drank, one of my goals was to go over to Ireland and Scotland and check out some of these ancient breweries. So fun. I would still do that, but not with the same lens, obviously.
Well, I haven't really seen much outside of Canada as far as breweries, but within, I mean, that's the next step, is to get to Europe eventually and see all these things that I've read about and watched videos on. And there's Alexander Keats in Nova Scotia that started and popped up in 1820. I mean, it's a big commercial. It's well known in Halifax. Everybody goes to the Keats Brewery. But it's really freaking cool inside. Like, you get to see where the old stoneworks of the building, the old foundation itself. You got to see their old style tap room. You go through a tour that involves a lot of history involved with that whole brewery itself. It was really fascinating. And then you get into a lot of the craft brewers. You start to walk in around in Quebec, and even here locally in Ottawa. We have so many of them that I've been through quite a few of them. And they all have their own interesting tale and story. I think the one that strikes me most, there's two for opposite reasons. There's one that I partner with quite a bit on a lot of things. The owner's great. His name's David Longbottom, and he traveled around the world. He was very successful in the world of technology. And he put that into the brew pub aspect, where his site brews everything in-house, and all the food is locally sourced ingredients of comfort food on an international menu. And you think about that, this is the way a tavern used to be. You know, taverns were predominantly run by women, in fact, but they would brew and they would have a restaurant. The only thing he's missing now is the sleeping chambers, but it's just really cool to go in there and you can see his tanks doing all the work. And, you know, it's so craft that they'll brew a batch and they're turning over what's on the list pretty regularly because of the demand for it. I mean, it's very high. And then you go into somewhere like Bose, which is famous for a beer called Bose Lugtred, which is a mirror of what's called a Kolsch or a lagered ale. It's in Van Cleek Hill, so it's like an hour and 20-minute drive from here. And it's cool because you go in there and it's an experience of just sort of having a party. The brewery tour lasts about 3 minutes. You're not there for the tour.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
This is Ontario's largest craft brewer now, because craft brewers cannot be owned by any conglomerate to classify.
What's the name of it again?
Bose, BAU''S. So what they did was they took a dairy farm and converted the dairy equipment, which is quite common because to pasteurize milk and to treat milk and to make it drinkable is very similar to brewing. A lot of the steps are quite similar. So they often get an old coffee roaster to roast their grains, to turn them into fermentable sugars. To cook those malts in the end. But there's so many fascinating breweries just even locally here. And even in the States, you have a wealth. It's like a 10 or 12 X factor over Canada. I mean, there's just so much.
It's just popping. Every time I travel, we go out to eat or something. It's just microbreweries and great. You know, it's like it's like, okay, I quit drinking, and all of a sudden, all these great beers come out in the market. But I'm replacing that urge again with the NAs. But I have to laugh because uh, you're gonna kick out of this, Rob. Um, One of my favorite movies of all time, is Strange Brew.
That's hilarious.
I don't know how many times you've seen that movie. I'm 55, so that movie came out when I was in high school, and I had my boys watch it the other day, and they now they tell their friends about it, but I just had to throw that out there because with my attention deficit, that popped into my head when I'm thinking about Canada. I thought about Bob and Doug McKenzie and Strange Brew.
Yeah,
and
those
how
guys
classic
are
a movie.
hilarious. Oh yeah.
I'm sure
Oh
maybe
yeah,
you hear
talking
that.
about back aching.
You don't.
Yeah, I know that. I've almost forgotten about that movie, but I actually can't even remember much about it. But I remember it was a massive hit.
It was a classic. It was a classic. Hey, listen, so I guess as we kind of wrap up the show, if people are interested in hiring you for a virtual wine tasting party, are you able to do the United States? I'm sure you are, correct?
Yeah, I have some clients in the States, so I have done that. Yeah, that's usually. I mean, usually you have to source it for them, and then they pick it up and do the buying arrangements because as a non-American, it's tough to buy booze for Americans, and even if you're in the states, every state has very different alcohol laws, and a lot of them tie back to prohibition and temperance. That ties back to the whole temperance prohibition era. And think about it. New York State, for instance, you can't ship booze to anybody. They have to walk to the store and get it. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yep. But half the states are like that. The other half you can deliver end to end in the states. It's so, and then there's just different rules and laws. Some of them are like, I know Pennsylvania has much stricter standards in shopping into like local, private, commercial stores than other states. They have a pretty strong state-run apparatus there. So it all varies differently. So, it's easy though. You just give a recommended list on wine or beer or both and send them shopping, and people are usually happy to engage. The one last thing I do in partnership with a great company called Cheftorial is virtual dinner parties where the whole sommelier experience steps in there as well.
That's awesome. I like sushi a lot, and I have a friend of mine that just sold his Rapids. I was going to hire him for a private sushi reception or something where he could show us how to make sushi.
Love sushi.
Okay, what's your favorite Cabernet?
Ooh, I tend to like Californian. I'm just trying to think. Klein has a pretty good Cabernet. Opus One definitely has a very good Cabernet, as does Caymus. I've had
That's
all three
name,
of
by
those.
the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I've had all three of those. And Californian Wine Show used to come up here annually for years until the pandemic. So I mean, some of those you get into some very high end, high reserve, small plots of parcels of land. It's like it's tight knit designated region within the region itself, and you can get into hundreds of dollars on a bottle there. I mean, even J. Loire has its site-specific wines that shoot way up from its generic, Cabernet Sauvignon, which is what, about 20 US, 22 US a bottle.
Yeah,
I mean, you
I
can get into a
actually
couple $100 a bottle, 400,
the
500,
Lord
$600 a bottle easily.
was one of my favorites. I was really partial to Sangiovese. That was kind of my favorite wine, and
Okay.
I always enjoyed kind of a blend. And
Chianti's.
there was a local place called the First Avenue Wine House here in Cedar Rapids, and Tracy Weber owns it, and she's awesome. And I haven't been there obviously for a while because I don't drink, but when I did, she would have the actual winery owners, or whatever the term is for those people, but they'd be signing bottles and stuff. So I have a number of different signed Cabernets and Sangios, and that was always my Sangiovese.
Well, that's the main grape for Chianti.
Oh, that's right. That's
Sangiovese.
right. That's right. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that.
And with Super Tuscans, it's in combination. I mean, there's certain Super Tuscans that are just Cabernet. They're Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Franc predominantly because, Bulgaria along the coast has rocky, gravelly soils, or Sassicaia, which is the home of the Super Tuscan. But it blended Sangiovese in some cases with international grape varieties. And it's funny because it created these brilliant wine styles that were classified as table wine because it broke all the rules of the hierarchy of wine in a lot of these European countries. And the US has this hierarchy too, as does Canada. Any wine producing power does. And it's because it didn't use those specific grapes that were culturally or historically rich in the area of the specific production zones with specific processes. So the Super Tuscans and under Piero Antinori, is the Antinori family that really revolutionized that. With their uncle from Piemonte, who was influenced by French wine production. And that's how that all came to be. Giacomo Tacius was the, I believe, the winemaker that had his hands involved in that, the master behind that. But it's Sangiovese has a huge, rich culture behind it and history behind it. It gets right back to around the 14th century and around outside of Florence. It's really the
Man,
home.
your knowledge level is impressive. I could talk a long time about this, even though I don't do it. I still have an interest in that space. And a lot of my friends are always asking me, when we're out for dinner. A lot of times I'll order the wine because my friend order. But I really enjoy the fact you've got a lot of passion in this industry.
Oh, thanks, man.
And again, I'm very grateful you were on the show. Part of my is to continue learning, and I'm sure yours is as well. And
yeah, absolutely.
Reach you. What's the best way to reach you?
Well, they can reach me on LinkedIn. I think it's under my profile is I am Rob Statham or something. I created that. I somehow got that. I was able to do that. It's kind of funny. Or they can hit up the Drunken Grape, or they go at the Drunken Grape on Facebook. They can also hit me up at rob@thedrunkengrape.com or info@thedrunkengrape.com. They can go to the website. I also have a YouTube channel. I invite people to come in and subscribe to that. I've got the Drunken Grape YouTube channel, and I've got the Virtual Happy Hour Experience, which is some of the shows you've probably watched come from that channel.
I did, yeah.
So people can go in there and subscribe and comment, but YouTube doesn't really have a direct messaging system other than commenting, say, hey, get a hold of me. So the best way is really by email. Business email is always the best. info@or rob@thedrunkengrape.com.
Well, listen, I wish you great success, and I'm happy,
man.
like I said, our paths crossed. I know you got a busy day, so I'm going to let you go. But again, thanks for all you do. And once you get the non-alcoholic virtual parties going, I want to be your first client. So
awesome. Yeah, we can definitely work on that. That's cool. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, man. Take care. Thanks for being on the show. And
Hey,
always, keep living undeterred, man.
Absolutely.